When it comes to transportation infrastructure, I think there are three important things we need to look at. First, we need to make sure that the money that we're already allocating to the Department of Transportation, that it's being spent wisely. The legislature in the last session put together an audit where we audited the entirety of DOT and we found several hundred millions in savings. Right now, Secretary Ross is implementing those findings that they had so we can make sure that the taxpayer money that we're already giving to the DOT, that's being spent in a judicious manner. So that's the first part. Secondly, we need to make sure that our construction practices meet up with those of our neighboring states. What we find right now is that in Wisconsin, we pay substantially more per mile of road than our neighboring states. Now, that would be totally understandable if we were talking about comparing ourselves to Florida, where they don't have winters and frost and so forth, salt erosion on the roads. But right here in Wisconsin, I think Secretary Ross is looking at this right now, implementing a policy called Replace in Kind, making sure that when we reconstruct our roads and bridges that we do it in what was there and we don't over-engineer, which brings in added cost to projects. So that's the second important thing. And then thirdly, once we've taken care of those two, which are being worked on right now, the last piece of that comes down to the funding. And part of that comes what level of bonding should we have. I've always pushed to have a lower level of bonding. I think about $250 million per biennium is an appropriate amount because that's what we can pay off in interest every biennium. So I think that would be an appropriate amount. And above that, then we have to look at what's left. And our only option, I believe, is we shouldn't bond more, so we either got to find new revenues or we have to cut back on the amount of projects. Well, I think that we have a lot to do here in Northeast Wisconsin, particularly with Highway 41 between Appleton and De Pere, expanding that to 3 lanes. So I think we are going to have to find new revenues. I caution against a gas tax because a gas tax, every year, more and more miles are being driven by energy-efficient vehicles, vehicles that use less gasoline per mile, and then of course all electric vehicles. So it's going after a group that we're going to see a regressive amount of revenue coming to the state. I think there's a few proposals out there which would find a way to work to see that the people who are using the roads, that in an equitable and fair manner, that they are assessed for the miles that they are driving. So I think when it comes to finding that last piece of it, that's probably where it's going to come from. People are talking about the possibility of tolling too, particularly Highway 94 from the Illinois border up into the Minneapolis border. That brings with some challenges too, but certainly something worth exploring. But those 3 things we've been working on, and I think we'll be in a position in this next budget now to come full circle, close that loop, and make sure that we have an adequate level and a sustainable level of funding for our transportation infrastructure.
I think this is the one issue that people really agree on, whether they're Republicans or Democrats or somewhere in between. When I'm knocking doors and I ask people what's on their mind, roads almost inevitably comes up in conversation. So to answer your question, no, I do not think that the state is adequately funding roads at this time. We've done what even several past transportation secretaries have claimed as reckless borrowing for the roads repairs that we have. Currently, we're paying 22 cents per dollar is going towards that debt rather than to roads themselves. So we do have to do something. The state is responsible for funding more than they are now. I do think that this is when people start to shy away from what I think of as difficult conversations. So you might have seen that there's a movement called Just Fix It to get roads repaired. I think we should start talking about Just Fund It and trying to figure out ways that we're going to do that. And that is going to have some responsibility put on the legislator to decide how that's funded. And I think those conversations include things like indexing the gas tax to inflation, like maybe a small, modest increase and then indexing it from that point. We did have that in the state. 2006, I think, was when we last had that, with the intention that that was going to come back, and we never did bring that back. So it's important that we do that. I also think we need to also possibly look at, that's not going to fill the entire gap, so we might need to look at a very modest increase in registration fees. I mean, Appleton voted to do that ourselves, to pay for the roads that the state wasn't funding anymore through a wheel tax. So those are all parts of a difficult conversation. I think that the key is to say, yes, we're going to have to do something, but let's make sure what we're doing is not unnecessarily burdening one particular group of people. And for me, that would be the working class who are using those roads every day to going from A to B. But we have to start those conversations, and right now, there's too much partisan divide. People are afraid to even say the word tax, and we really do need to think about what we're going to invest our money in, and one of those things that people have told us they want us to do that for is roads.